The episode kicks off with someone apologizing because they didn't mean to turn the other person into a hero, intending to make them feel that way, and a guy with a bloody face asks why they're apologizing since he got into that state through his own stubbornness. The girl says thanks to him, they managed to keep what they could have lost, and countless people were spared from tears. He was exactly the hero she wished for, and then asks him to tell his wish, calling him a hero. Alan wakes up and says it was a nostalgic dream. Lies greets Alan, who responds, and Lies continues saying breakfast was ready and they could eat together. Alan asks where the other two are, and Lies says they haven't woken up yet, and she was thinking of waking them up, until the girls show up saying good morning, and Lies is startled by Noel's attire. Noel says it doesn't matter because Alan had seen her in a much more compromising state, and Lies asks Alan what she meant, shaking him up and down. Alan wonders when he'll find the kind of peace he's seeking, and after that whole mess, everyone sits down for a meal. Lies explains the situation about Noel. She got hot working in the forge and took off some clothes, and that's it. Alan confirms and doesn't think he was lucky to see that, and Noel says she doesn't do that in front of just anyone, and Alan decides he feels honored. Noel tells Alan to eat quickly because he's going to test the new sword she forged. Lies hears Noel talking and says he promised to help her with the paperwork for the ducal house, and at the same time, Mylene says he was supposed to nap with her that day, and Alan asks if he made all these promises. At that moment, the guild receptionist appears at the door, quite irritated, asking Alan why he never shows up at the guild. She brings several requests that people had made for him. In a frenzy, she drops everything on the floor, grabs Alan's arm, and tells him to come with her immediately. And then there's a big commotion with the girls angry because he promised to test Noel's sword, handle Liza's paperwork, and nap with Mylene, but the receptionist says there's a swarm of monsters that only he can defeat. The place is chaos, and Noel says it's not her problem. Then the girls start pulling Alan in different directions. The poor guy suffers a lot, and if you don't want to be pulled apart by all your limbs, subscribe to the channel to not miss updates and receive the protection you deserve against this. In the end, Alan wonders if they really wanted to know his opinion on all that. After a while, Alan manages to do everything he had to do and lies exhausted on the floor, but still believes that's a way to live in peace. He stares at the sky for a while, until he goes to Lies to tell her he's going to travel to the Empire, and she doesn't like much what he says, and Alan says it's good because it would break the routine. If he finds a place that seems good to live, he would stay there. Lies says she understands, even though she's a little sad. Noel says the Victuar Empire was a rival empire, but they had called a truce, and she had heard there were many skilled dwarf blacksmiths there, and she could learn a lot. Alan wonders why she spoke as if it was with him, and then Mylene says she's going with them too. Noel sees no problem because they wouldn't be a burden to him, and he doesn't disagree. Alan asks what Lies is going to do, and she replies that she had work to do for the Duchy, so she would go with them. After everyone is in a carriage, Lies says goodbye to Beatrice, asking her to take care of the Duchy. Beatrice asks Lies to take care of herself, and ends up falling to the ground while running. Noel asks if it's okay for Lies to go. She's no longer a princess, but she's the lady of the Duchy. Lies replies that's exactly why. After all, the Empire had still been trying to unite the continent for half a year. The chaos in the kingdom was a great opportunity for them to act, and there was no sign of movement. The Westfelt House was in charge of protecting the kingdom's borders. As a leader, she needed to understand the Empire's internal situation. Noel says she should bring at least Beatrice as a guard, but Lies thinks if Alan was with her, Beatrice would feel more at ease than if she accompanied her. And those were Beatrice's own words. To Alan, it was a lot of responsibility, and Lies says she counts on him. They spend some time in the carriage. Noel falls asleep until she wakes up because the carriage starts shaking a lot. The horse stops because it gets a little scared. Lies asks Alan if something wrong is happening, and Alan says yes, and it could get a little complicated. As they look up the mountain, they find sand wolves. There were rumors that crossing paths with them was practically a death sentence, and they were also called the Desert Reapers. Alan then goes to them, and it seems it was very easy to defeat them. A matter of seconds, and the job was already done. Alan says they could now continue the journey, and the girls are not surprised at all because, well, it's Alan, right? Alan says he would like a little gratitude once in a while. Apparently, they were getting used to it. Alan says that terrain was perfect for ambushes, and it's very strange for Desert Reapers to appear, wondering who could be manipulating that. And then they arrive in a city where trade was booming, and there were many people in the streets. Lies found it amazing how how that city was far from the imperial capital and yet so bustling. Noel was looking for a blacksmith. Lies asks Alan if there was any problem. Alan says there was nothing, just thinking that the air was a bit tense. He knew that was a border town, but felt there were too many guards. Lies thought he was exaggerating, and Alan hopes it's just that until a girl bumps into him, and he apologizes because he wasn't paying attention to the way. He immediately recognizes the girl named Henriette, and he says it's been a long time since he saw her, and she asks what he's doing in a place like that. And he says he could ask her the same thing because she's the daughter of a marquess, strolling around the city without any guard by her side. He asks what could have led her to that, and she, a bit embarrassed, says it's none of his business and asks him to let her go, and she apologizes. Noel asks if that cutie was an acquaintance of his. Lies also recognizes Henriette's family, and Henriette also recognizes Lies and asks if she's really the head of the Westfeld Duchy now, and also asks what brings such an important person to the empire. Lies says they were just strolling, and Henriette says she lies very badly, but it doesn't matter. She won't ask them what they were doing there anymore, but she will give a warning to everyone. The empire was on edge, and the situation could turn the country upside down. It was better for them to go back home to their kingdom before they ended up getting involved in those problems. Noel says they had just arrived. Alan says she talked about going back, but he was practically a wanderer now. She says the Black Wolf Knights were acting, and asks if they now understood how bad the situation was. The group didn't know who those knights were, and Henriette explains that the empire allowed them to act as they pleased, so they were the most feared order of knights in the entire empire. It was best not to get involved with those knights. Then she turns her back and leaves. Alan thanks her for the warning, and Noel thinks they arrived at a bad time. Alan runs after Henriette, and Lies calls him. He says he'll be back, and they can wander around. The girls just watch as Alan passes by a man with an ox and a cart. Lies wonders if they were really going to wander around. Alan then catches up with Henriette, and she asks if he wants something, and Alan says yes, but not with her, with the disciple of the gods he wanted to speak to. The warning she had just given, whether as the daughter of the Marquess or as a disciple of the gods, Henriette responds that in their last life she kept telling him what to do, but in that world she was just a girl named Henriette. Alan asks if she still had her powers as a disciple. Henriette says she did, but with certain limitations, and asks him what happened. Alan says nothing, just wondering how she also ended up in that world. She says it's like Alan's fate was to be involved in problems, so she considered it an extra service. Alan asks if she was worried about him, but she doesn't let him finish and says that in any case, if he wanted to live in peace, he should leave right away. Alan then turns around without hesitation and thanks Henriette, and she is relieved that he understood. Alan walks past the people and thinks he should meet the girls again soon, until an explosion happens. Well, Henriette said things were about to blow up, and then Alan goes to see what happened, and he sees a man running towards him telling him to get out of the way until he draws a sword. Alan really believed now that he was destined to get into trouble. Henriette was really not wrong. Alan sees that if he handed over that guy to the guards in that way, they would certainly ask a lot of questions. He really didn't know what to do until the man dies instantly, and Alan sees it was the work of demons. Even a green-haired knight approaches and asks what happened there. Alan says in his defense he had attacked him and he just defended himself, but he hadn't killed him. The knight says his story didn't seem to fit very well with that scene. She didn't understand how he had killed the man in such a horrible way without using a weapon or his gift. Alan asks how she knew he hadn't used a gift, and she replies that her gift was unusual. She could see the gift others used, and she asks if he knew about the existence of demons, and Alan says he did. The knight says the powers they used resembled gifts, but they are totally different, which means she couldn't see when they were being used, and Alan says he wasn't a demon, but something told him she wouldn't believe him, and she says she wouldn't believe unless he could prove it. Alan doesn't understand how he could prove he wasn't a demon. Alan thinks he got into a big mess. Defeating her there would be like provoking the Empire, and if he tried to escape, she would probably make things difficult. And just as she grabs Alan, he disappears, and then she orders to close the borders. Mylene had saved Alan, until Henriette, Lies, and Noel arrive with Henriette saying that right after the warning she had given, he gets into trouble. Lies said he was taking too long, and then Henriette showed up, and the idea of using Mylene's power was Henriette's own. Now, they should leave that country as soon as possible. Henriette says there was no way. All the roads leading to their kingdom had already been closed. It meant they would be stuck there for a while. Noel asks if there was no possibility for everyone to escape using Mylene's invisibility, but the knights wouldn't fall for the same trick twice. And then everyone looks at Henriette and she doesn't understand why everyone is looking at her, and Alan believes she can help, but Henriette thinks Alan is too presumptuous, and then she goes to her home, taking the group along. Upon arrival, she asks the butler to treat the people as guests, until Alan recognizes the butler, whose name is Silas. He was the head butler of the Westfeld house, but he had been expelled and was happy to see Alan. The butler says that when they left the Westfeld house in protest, the kind young lady accepted them there. But Henriette doesn't like the conversation at all and asks them to stop, and asks him to show the place for them to stay. She lived in that mansion alone, as she was an only child and her parents had already passed away. Alan asks her what had happened in that country, as there were many guards, the border closed, and the Black Wolf Knights. She explains that the emperor had been assassinated a year ago, and that's why the empire hadn't acted while the kingdom was in trouble, as they were busy dealing with their own problems. Night falls. Alan was looking at the sky until Henriette arrives in the room, and he says all that was the work of demons. Alan asks how long she had been watching him, and she doesn't understand the question, and Alan tells her not to play dumb. He knew she had been watching him, because if she hadn't, she wouldn't be there to hire Silas and the others, and not to mention she bumped into him right when he entered the empire. Henriette didn't want to admit it and says she'll go back to her room, and Alan wishes her good night. She thought that now Alan could smile. In her mind, she admits she couldn't stop thinking about him. She really was worried. That's why she had reincarnated into that world. She didn't want him to feel those bad things that broke her heart in the past life, so she had taken care of him ever since.